in this lesson, we'll talk a little bit more about inserting meshes into our Z tools. So really, inserting meshes is just the same as kind of appending a new subtool to this that's kind of a different model and then merging it together. So you're talking about different geometry shells that are included in the same tool. Now, the methods of actually including insert meshes are different, but they allow us to draw these onto the surface and include these in different ways so that they integrate well into the existing model. So we want the geometry here not to have any subdivision levels. And to be able to insert a mesh, we can use, for once, we can use the mesh insert dot. So right here, what we need to do is define the mesh that we actually want to insert. So under the brush, we'll go under modifiers for the mesh insert brush. And under mesh insert preview, we'll go ahead and select a mesh. So in this case, maybe we'll just select this polymesh star here. So now when we come in, as we draw this out onto the surface, it actually includes that in the subtool, and it's drawing it out right onto the surface. Now it's automatically masking, so it's leaving the inserted mesh unmasked, and it's masking everything else. So if we need to, we can come in and move it around before we actually integrate it. So much like we did with the Dynamesh, the difference is that when we unmask, we're not remeshing everything together. We're leaving it as a separate piece. So there's no sort of integration between these. It's just sitting on top of the surface as a separate piece. Okay, and you can come in here and continue to insert all across the surface. Okay, and we can unmask there. Now once we've got these meshes added, you can see they're all part of the same now subtool. If you eventually want to separate these out, you can start to go in into split. And in this case, we've added the same mesh multiple times. As we talked about earlier, this is the star that we've added multiple times. So we could say, okay, I want to split to similar parts. Okay, if I split to similar parts, you can see it's smart enough to know that all these stars are the same. So I'm just going to split the stars out as their own subtool, and I'll leave this one alone. Okay, if I come in now with the mesh insert, and I add a couple of stars, and then I could go into the insert brush, and I can change this to ring. Start to add a few rings in here. Now, if we want to kind of separate this out, because again, this is part of the same subtool, instead of separating this out into similar parts, which would make 1, 2, 3 subtools, one with the stars, one with the rings, one with this. If we wanted to actually separate everything out on its own, we could say split to parts. And that'll actually create a subtool for each one of those insert meshes that's been added. Okay, so there are ways to separate things out once you've actually used the insert brush on those. We looked at the insert cylinder. You can also insert the cubes. A lot of these are good for using with Dynamesh. With Dynamesh, you need to have a solid object. Some of these other ones have open ends, which will allow you to use mesh replacement, which is kind of cool. I'm going to show you that real quick. So let's say that we've got a polygroup that we want to add right here. So I'll hit Control W with that mask. That'll create kind of a polygroup. So now with our insert H cylinder selected, I'll go ahead and draw it out from that particular polygroup. So something like that. And you can see if we look that there's no geometry on the back side. And so now when we Control drag and Control drag, it's not Dynameshing it, but it is connecting the two pieces together with a new polygroup. So we call that mesh replacement. That's kind of a cool thing that you can do with your insert brushes as well. You can kind of blend that together. But it's not the same as Dynamesh. It's not changing any of the other attributes here. Although you can take this and Dynamesh it now if you wanted to. And let's go ahead and turn off polyframe. There are also a number of ways that we can create curves. So we can insert curves like this. Okay, if you want to increase the size of that, you can change the draw size, and then you can modify the curve so it's sticking in, and we can kind of move that around. Great way to create some curve-based detail. Okay, we can also go into our stroke, and under curve we have these curve modifiers, so we can change the size. We can have it taper, or we can come in here and change how that taper happens. So we could flip that and have it tapered like this to create a little sort of tendril coming out here. We also have the ability to create curves that are snapped along the surface. There's a lot of different options here for creating surfaces here using some different insert techniques. We also have the ability to create insert multi-mesh brushes. So in that case, maybe I have a bunch of different pieces that I want to actually add. So here's Machine Parts by Joseph Drust, which includes a lot of different options. So if I just go ahead and start inserting, you can see I'm inserting this mesh, but if I hit M on the keyboard, I can go and select all these different pieces that are related. Okay, these sort of mechanical type pieces, and I can start inserting those. Okay, so really powerful way of working. You can really start to add a lot of detail very, very quickly. So what if we want to create our own insert brush? So let's say we created that bolt, if you remember. Let's say we now want to use this to insert into our meshes. So we want to be able to add it to our meshes. So we want to make sure that we have the detail that we want. And I'm just going to come over the top. I'm going to go to brushes and I'll say create insert mesh. It's going to ask us, do we want to create a new insert mesh, or do we want to append it to an existing one? So we'll say new, and it's going to create a new brush for us. So now if we go back into a sphere here, we can start to add our own little screws or bolts. Now you can see that these are sitting right on top of the surface. We can go into our brush and we can change some of those brush settings in here. For instance, we could change the depth and we could pull this down. And considering this is the surface, if we kind of pull that down, now it's penetrating in. Versus if we come in and add it up here, you can see now it's sitting above the surface. So depending on what you need, you can change that value and how it actually embeds into the surface that you're adding it to. Okay. Now keep in mind, you can use this with symmetry as well. So if I turn on symmetry, and let me actually get another sphere here, and we'll make it a polymesh. We turn on symmetry, and let's turn on radial symmetry. We can start to add these meshes symmetrically. So here we've got just a bunch of these bolts added around the surface. If we increase the number, we can get something really higher res. So we can come in here, start to add these bolts very, very quickly. Okay, and then you saw how we were able to come in and separate those out into their own subtool if we need to. Okay, so again, we're working with meshes that don't have subdivision levels. We're inserting one mesh into another mesh, and we do have the ability to now split those out if we need to, based on the similar parts, or even based on the masking. Okay, so really powerful way of working. There's a lot of insert mesh brushes that you can use, and you can also create your own, as we did with our bolt. Okay, we have a course on that goes into more depth on insert mesh brushes and creating your own brushes that flow along a curve, and also the multi-mesh brushes that we looked at, where you've got a number of different options that you can add. So make sure to check that out if you want to get more in depth in that topic. Okay, so the next thing that we'll talk about is remeshing. Kind of talk about the concept of remeshing, what that is, and how it can be used in ZBrush. So we'll tackle that topic in the next lesson.